Hey folks, let's continue on with our discussion of Booleans. What I talked about on day one was this is a quick review, is what the Boolean class is. We found out that it's quite extraordinarily small. It contains only two objects, the true and the false. We talked about how to build up expressions whose value is the true or the false. We did that with comparison operators like less than, greater than, is equal to, and so on. And we also talked about the so-called logical operators of and, or, and not that take other smaller Boolean expressions and allow you to create larger Boolean expressions out of them. And then last time we talked about what it is that you can do with the Booleans, at least one of the tasks that they can carry out for you. That is, we use them to make decisions with the if and the elif and the else. So we can perform a test. The result of that test will either be the true or the false. If it's the true, then we'll execute some block of code. If it's false, we'll bypass that block of code and perhaps do some other test. That's the basic logic of it. All right, so let's actually write a little bit of code to review. And then I wish to show you another way to construct loops. We did for type loops in the last chapter, but now we're about to do while type loops. All right, so look at the code I've got for you right there. First of all, I've got a really silly function. It's called the say function, and it takes some input, let's assume string, and simply prints that to the screen. I wanted to have a function called say because I'm about to do something like that old child's toy called the see and say, just to explain to you once again how if, elif, and else work out, to review that with you. So here we go. So look at the function that says see and say. So here we go. So I imagine something really very simple here. That is that the input value, that is the value of animal, will be some string. And let's say that it's either cat or dog or perhaps, hey, duck. And then we will do a test and determine what it is that that animal will say, like the old see and say toy. So here we go. There's the keyword if. And of course, you know, after the if has to come a Boolean type expression. So here we go. So if that animal is, we'll start with dog. Okay, so that's how we test for equality, as you know, the double equal sign, no space in between. So in that case, let us say rough. That's what dogs say, right? At least in the United States. In other countries, I think they say something else, but for us, we'll say it's rough. Now, okay, so we've tested whether the animal is a dog. Now, we want to test whether it's a cat. Now, we absolutely could just do another if. However, it's a bit more efficient, and I think logically it is prettier to use the elif instead, because remember that if you have an elif, it's tied to the if that is above it, the closest if that is above it. And that elif condition will be evaluated in the case that the if above it was false, or if you have multiple elifs, a particular elif will be evaluated only if the if and the elifs above it all turned out to be false. So let's say that the animal is not a dog. That means that Python will then test this particular Boolean. That is it a cat? In which case we will say meow. And then finally, let us assume that we know that it will either be a dog, a cat, or a duck. Okay, so if it isn't dog or cat, it will automatically be duck. I don't know how we know that, but let us say that we do know that. That means that we can use the else, right? And again, the logic of the else is that if the associated if and elif above turn out to all be false, then we will automatically do what the else says. Okay, we'll automatically do what the else says. So, oh no, actually, I just reconsidered. Let's have another elif just to make the point that we can have multiple elifs, and then we'll do the else. Okay, so let's see, a dog and a cat. I'll go ahead and do duck here. So if it's a duck, we wish to say quack. And then finally, okay, so I've changed it a little bit. Finally, let's say that if we know it's not a dog, a cat, or a duck, it'll have to be a mouse. In the case that it's a mouse, in the case that it is a mouse, it will say squeak. That's how you spell squeak. Might not be, sorry. Um, yeah, and then let's actually run our code. Okay, so oops, indentation error. Oh, I see what I did. I forgot to put my passes in. These are two other functions that we'll write in just a moment. So let's run again. Oh, I'm sure you know by now that if you write a little bit of code, probably when you hit the run button, you will get a syntax error. So here we go. So see, then say, and then ooh, cat. Okay, so it says meow. So let's try again. So dog. Actually, it'll be nice to trace the logic of this. Okay, so let's think about the logic when we input cat. Okay, so the value of animal was cat, right? So so Python first tested the Boolean after the if, that is animal dog, and the answer was no. So we skipped the associated block of code, that is line number 6, and then went and did the test on line number 7. That's how elifs work, right? If the if was false, we go and test the first elif. So we tested on line number 7 whether the animal was a cat, and it was. And then we said meow, and then once in an if elif else block, once you found something that's true in one of the ifs or elifs, you're done with the block. Okay, so nothing else gets tested, and of course we don't execute the else, because the else is what gets executed if everything above it is false. Now in the case in which we sent dog, well, let's see. We once again did the test on line number 5. Yep, the animal is a dog, so we said rough, and then we exited the if elif else structure, and then we'll do more. So let us say that we have a mouse. Okay, so we'll send mouse, and ooh, so it squeaked. Oh, but we never tested whether it was a mouse. We didn't have to, okay, because what we assumed is that our animal would be dog, cat, duck, or mouse. And so the tests on line 5, 7, and 9 all turned out to be false. And since they all turned out to be false, and we had an else statement, that else statement is automatically executed. So we said squeak. Okay, so that's your quick review of if, elif, and else. Now, let's talk about another way to construct loops, okay? And the new keyword here will be while. So in this chapter, we will have introduced a number of new keywords. One is if, another is elif, E-L-I-F, a third is else, and then finally, we will have this new keyword while. And while will let us construct loops. That loop in just the way that for loops loop. That is, we'll have a block of code that will execute potentially many times, top to bottom, and then top to bottom again, and then top to bottom again, and so on. Okay. Now, the way while loops work is this. Okay. After the word while comes a Boolean expression. Okay. So we're about to construct a Boolean expression here on line number 16, and let's look at the comment so we'll know what this function is supposed to do. Return the smallest n such that 2 to the n is greater than x. Curious. Return the smallest n such that 2 to the n is greater than x. So for instance, if our x was, I don't know, 10, what's the smallest power of 2 that's greater than 10? Well, 1 power of 2 is 8, and that's not big enough. Oh, the next is 16. So the smallest power of 2 that's greater than 10 is 16. And the power of 2 in the case of 16 is 4, so we should return 4. So the idea here is this, is that we'll start with n is 0. So we'll go ahead and initialize n to 0. So notice that the structure here is like the structure of many of the for loops that we constructed. We initialize, and then we'll update. And then what we'll do is this. So long as 2 to the n is less than the input value x, we will continue to increase the value of n. And as soon as it's greater than, we will return that value. Okay, so what's going to come after while? A Boolean valued expression. Okay, and what will the Boolean valued expression be? So while 2 to the n is less than x. Okay, so that is definitely a Boolean expression. It's a comparison. It has the less than comparer in it. So that 2 to the n less than x will return either true or false for some values of n and x. And if it is true, okay, this is the crucial point. If it is true, if the Boolean after while is true, we will execute the body of the while loop. And the body of the while loop, of course, will be all the indented code after it. So it should come as no surprise that we have a colon at the end of line 17. And then we will have a body of text that will be indented. And that body of text is really very simple. All we need to do is increment the value of n. Okay, so if, for instance, we were to send for x, if we were to send 10, then, well, n's initial value would be 0. So we'll ask whether 2 to the 0 is less than x, which of course it is. Anything to the 0 power is 1. And then we would increment, that is, increase the value of n by 1. And then we would go back and test again. Okay, that's how while loops work, right? You run the body, and then you go back and you perform the test of the Boolean after the while again. And then we would have 2 to the 1 is less than x, which would still be true, and 2 squared less than x, which would still be true, and 2 cubed less than x, 2 cubed is 8, also less than 10. And then finally, n would increment to 4, in which case the Boolean expression 2 to the n less than x would be false. 2 to the fourth is 16. We assume that our input x was 10, so that'll be false, which means that we will no longer execute the body of the while loop, and instead we will skip to the first line of code underneath the body, which means, of course, we have to unindent. So we're now at the same level of indentation as the body of the loop itself, body of the function itself, like lines 16 and 17. And at that point, we simply return the value of n. Okay, so let's see if this actually works. So pow 2, and then let's try 10, like I said. Oh, it's really, really interesting. 4, just like we said. Okay, so we did a number of tests. Okay, we did 2 to the 0 less than 10. That was true. We did 2 to the 1 less than 10. That was also true. 2 squared less than 10, 2 cubed less than 10. And then finally, 2 to the 4th was not less than 10. So the Boolean on line 17, which I just highlighted, became false, which means we skipped the body and went to line number 19 and returned n. So there we go. There's an example of a while loop. Together with that old pattern that we've seen before, which is initialize and increment. Okay. Now, I'm going to write another little while loop with you here. And I'll probably come back tomorrow and review this as well and look at more examples with you. I think that would be good. Maybe construct a more complex example of a while loop with you. But let's do something a little bit silly here because I want to show you another way to construct a while loop, which in some instances is really, really useful. So what we'll do is we'll try to make the user say something or another. That is, we'll try to make the user input a certain string. Okay, that means, of course, we'll have to use the input function, which we have encountered before. So here we go. Now, this is going to be really quite extraordinary. Look at this expression, while true. Okay, so first of all, let's make sure we understand why this is perfectly acceptable Python syntax, okay? And why Python will know what to do with this. While true. Well, what has to come after while? A Boolean valued expression. And is capital T true, a Boolean valued expression? Absolutely. And what is the value of true? Well, we can go over to the console and find that out. So what is the value of true? Hey, the value of true is true. And I called an expression like that literal. That is, when you evaluate it, you simply get the object back out again. So, I mean, line number 23 is perfectly fine. At least from the point of view of, Python will understand what it means and can do that. However, of course, it will seem like that a certain problem has been introduced, right? Because the way I explained the while loop back in the previous function is that Python will continue to execute the body of the while loop so long as its associated Boolean is true. And that absolutely is correct. Well, we'll have to modify that in just a moment, but say that's correct. Well, that would mean then that we, I suppose, had an infinite loop here, or about to begin an infinite loop on line number 23, because, true will always be true. That means that when Python goes back and evaluates the Boolean on line number 23 after it has looped, it will always find that it's true, so it will loop again. So that looks very much like an infinite loop. However, it doesn't have to be. And I will show you actually, I said a moment ago that we had seen all the new keywords for the chapter. That's not quite true. There's actually one other that I wish to introduce to you, and that is called break. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so we're going to make the user say something. Okay, so we're going to say to the user, we wish them to say, and let's say, okay? What say will be some string. It's what we want them to say. Okay, and notice what we've done inside of the input function here. Again, what's the value that you send to the input function, that is its input, is what will be displayed in the console. And that's then, of course, what the user will see. And then what the user will have to do is they'll have to input something after that. So let's actually make this look a bit nicer. And I've used concatenation here. Okay, so you can build up a string inside of that input to the input function. That is that string that will be displayed in the console. So I've done that with the plus symbol. That is concatenation. And then, okay, so let us determine now whether what that answer is, that is what the user typed in, and then hit enter, if that's what the person is supposed to have said, the user is supposed to have said. So if answer is the same as what say, then let's do something. I don't know, print it. We'll print something. So something like got it. And then I'll show you something, okay? There's a way to exit a loop. The way that you can exit a loop is with a break statement. And the way the break statement works is this, is that consider, now it's entirely possible that the break statement could be inside of multiple loops because you can, put a loop inside of a loop. So what the break statement does is this, is it goes to the nearest loop, the closest loop, and it stops that one. You can also use break and for type loops as well. We never had the opportunity to do that. In the future, I expect that we will. But in a while true type loop, if you wish to actually exit the loop at some point in time, you have to use break. Otherwise, it will truly be an infinite loop. Okay, so let's actually try this out. Okay, so while true, and then I want the user to say dog. Okay, of course, the user will be me, so I'm both the programmer and the user of the program. So let's see. So say dog. Well, I'll try cat. That didn't work. So say dog. I'll try mouse. It also didn't work. And you understand what happened here, right? Because we're in this while true loop at this particular point in time. So we got the answer. Answer was initially cat, and then it was mouse. And then we asked whether that answer was the same as what say, and what say was dog. So we asked whether cat is dog, and the answer was no. So we didn't break. Then we asked whether mouse is dog, and the answer was no. So we didn't break. So we're in this while loop, right? And it just continues to turn away until we actually say what we're supposed to say, in which case we got it and we can actually exit the loop. So that's an example of a while true loop, and they can be quite useful, and we'll certainly use them just quite often throughout the class. Okay, so that is our introduction to while type loops. And I think, like I said, what we'll do tomorrow is this, is we'll come and we'll do a more complex example, uh, perhaps actually solve a nice little problem by use of a while loop.